Hi everyone and welcome to Book Boop. My name is Rachel and today I'm going to be doing my October wrap up. So I'm going to talk about all the books that I read in the month of October. I have my Peppo here next to me and he's been having a little bit of trouble with his skin being dry lately. So if you're itching or just dog noises, I'm sorry, but he just really wants to be up here with me. I'm also going to be referring to my trusty notebook with all of my notes to make sure I keep on track for you all on what I read. But let's go ahead and jump in. So like most people in October, I read a lot of spooky, creepy books, so that's mainly what I'm going to be talking about today is lots of spooky books. And this one was no exception. It was my first delve into adult horror, and that is The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. If you haven't heard about this book before, it takes place in the late 80s and early 90s. We're following this group of housewives, and they all feel like they lead pretty dull lives, and they end up coming together to create a book club. And in this book club, they love to read true crime, kind of put a dose of excitement in their lives. And until one day, a vampire moves into their neighborhood, and they do anything they can to protect their families. The concept sounds like a lot of fun, and I know Grady Hendrix said the basic idea he had for this book was, what if his southern mother was pit against a vampire to protect her family, and the vampire just wouldn't stand a chance. And I love the idea of that. It's so much fun. Definitely my first experience with adult horror, so it's a lot more intense than I am used to. I enjoyed the focus of the housewife in this book. It's very relatable to me, also being a mom. I'm a working mom, but I'm a mom and I have a husband and everything. And so I related very much to sort of like the housewife life and taking care of the family and the kid and the house. It focused on the humor as well as the underrated difficulty of being a mom. Kind of the whole thing of the mom kind of taking care of the household. And at least in this situation in the 80s and everything, at least with the husband that she had and the sort of southern lifestyle that she lived, it was still that kind of thing of the husband didn't really understand how much she actually does for the home. He goes and works and doesn't really see that her job is really that hard, but she takes care of a lot of stuff and has two, I think a teenage child and then like an older child that's like 10 or 11 or something like that. So she just has a lot on her plate and her husband doesn't kind of realize that. So it was I kind of understood that, not feeling like, I don't feel like my husband thinks that of me. He knows how much stuff I do, but you know what I mean. The writing caused a lot of physical reactions for me. There were some parts that were really horror, scary, kind of gross. There was stuff involving rats and things, which I'm not really scared of mice and rats, but when it comes to having an entire swarm of them trying to attack somebody, ooh, there were lots of parts where I was like gasping or just kind of like slowly taking my hand and putting it over my mouth and being like, oh my goodness, what is happening right now? So a lot of physical reactions in this book. I have to admit, I felt so frustrated for our main protagonist. It was the kind of situation where she knew something was going on. She knew something was up and something was wrong, but nobody would believe her, especially her husband, even some of her friends, but especially like all the husbands in this sort of mom group didn't believe them when they kind of came forward and said, hey, we think this guy's bad. Not like full out saying, hey, we think he's a vampire, but hey, we think this guy's bad, and them not believing them. And that was it's so frustrating to just see how basically they just didn't believe these women because they thought they were just being silly housewives and trying to create drama to give themselves some excitement in their lives. And you're just like, no, they're like they have a real concern here. So it was so frustrating to see that. Like you just wanted to throw the book across the room. You were so frustrated for these protagonists. I was like, oh my goodness. There were quite a few trigger warnings in this book. There were trigger warnings for suicide, pet death, family death, addiction, and rape, though not as it's happening. It's explained as a past thing and not like right then and there, thankfully. But there's still a lot of trigger warnings, which kind of I've noticed, at least from other people when they've read horror, have kind of mentioned several like different trigger warnings. So usually horror does involve a lot of different trigger warnings, and this one is no exception. But I actually ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed the concept. I loved the idea of these housewives pit against this vampire who's basically trying to slowly tear their families apart and like get like integrated into this society. And anyways, it was just a lot of fun. A lot of heavy topics though. It definitely had some really creepy moments, had some funny moments. It was just a good mix of a good book. And it was my first Grady Hendrix and I really enjoyed it a lot. So I'm glad I gave this one a try, and that was my first delve into horror. This next one is actually more of a fantasy, and it's a newer release. I believe it's had some mixed reviews lately, but I actually was very interested in this book. This is A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. I don't know what happened there. My voice did something weird. This is a book about a magical school that honestly is really dangerous. You either graduate from the school or you die trying. So you go to the school, you don't leave, you're there for 4 years, and you just stay in the school, and to graduate, you have to get through this sort of very harrowing experience that you either pass or you die. You can also die during your education there as well. So you gotta stay focused. I have read Uprooted by Naomi Novik before, and it was honestly one of my least favorite books I've read. I really didn't like it, which I know is a little bit of a opinion that's not common. A lot of people really love Uprooted. I did not. I felt like it was very slow. And so I was a little bit nervous about jumping into something else by Naomi Novik, but the concept of this, sort of like a magic school type situation, and we're also following a protagonist who is very, very strong in her magic, but she's honestly a little bit afraid of it. She has enough strength to be able to protect herself from things inside of this school, but she's worried that if she were truly to unleash her power and use her power to its full potential, she could harm other people, and that's something that she really doesn't want to do. But she has a very sarcastic attitude that I just love. I love it when we have like a sassy, sarcastic character. It's a really unique magic school with intriguing concepts on the magic system, politics, and overall structure of the school. There's a lot of creating different sort of bands of people together. I can't think of the right word right now. I'm blanking out on the word. But kind of like forming these different gangs in the school of kind of like who's in your gang, who has what power, and what are they good at doing to protect themselves. Because basically this school, it protects them from monsters that want to eat them to be able to consume their magic. But being in the school is still safer than them being just out in the world. The school actually tries to protect them best as it can, but monsters still leak in. And so there's lots of potential to be eaten and killed by monsters. So you kind of create these different alliances. That's the word I'm thinking of. You create these different alliances within your class and trying to protect each other. I mean, they have to protect each other when they go to the cafeteria to eat. Like they have, monsters can jump out of the food in the cafeteria line and like consume you. And so you have to like constantly be checking and on guard literally all the time, which sounds exhausting. Like you have to do that for 4 years. That sounds so exhausting. So you kind of combine these alliances. There's a lot of kind of like politics in it as well, which is a really interesting idea. The writing style is very train of thought with minimal plot. So it kind of made it a slog. This book, in the end, I feel like was worth reading, but it is difficult. It is a hard read. It's very train of thought. So it feels like it's all over the place. We were in the main character's head the whole time. And because of that and the way that there are some like flashbacks here and there of her like thinking back to another experience before she was at the school or earlier in her school career, because I think she's a junior in this book. And there's like flashbacks, it's a very train of thought, and there's not a lot of plot for most of the book, to be honest. There's a lot of world building. So it's a slog. I'm going to be honest, it's a slog. Was it worth it in the end? Yes, but you had to push through it. And that's what I've been telling a lot of my friends. Some of my friends have tried reading this, had gotten like a chapter or two in, and then gave up immediately. And they're like, no, this is too much. This is too hard. It's a hard read. It really is. I'm glad I pushed through. In the end, I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the overall concepts. It started to have some kind of a plot towards like 80% in, which I know that's a long time, but once it gets about 80% in, then it really kind of kicks in with some semblance of a plot, and then you're kind of hooked to see what happens towards the end. But it's a slog. There's a lot of world building. You are having constant world building thrown at you through the entirety of the book. So it is a slog. I enjoyed the snarky and sarcastic voice of the main character. It's hard to process my enjoyment of this one, but its uniqueness won out. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars, and I'm looking forward to reading the next one and seeing what happens in this school. It ended in just a little bit of a cliffhanger to where I wanted to know what was going on. So I recommend it. Just be ready to have to push through, and it takes a while to read. It's not a very long book, but boy howdy, it feels long. So I'm just letting you know that ahead of time. All right, let's go ahead and jump into more sort of spooky books. This is a book I was so excited to read because it was supposed to be similar to having a Stranger Things feel, and that is The Devouring Gray by Lynn Herman. In this story, we're following this small town who has this sort of alternate reality within the woods of their town that's completely surrounds their town called the Gray. Apparently, back in the day, in kind of like the earlier settlement of this specific town, there was a monster that was plaguing the town, and then the founders of this town came together and used some like magical abilities to create an alternate sort of gray reality, so think the Upside Down in Stranger Things, to trap this monster. And throughout time, the people that are the descendants of the original creators of this other reality have been still living in this town, protecting this town. They have had sort of like different magical abilities that have been inherited down through their line that they use to be able to protect the town. Thing is this monster is actually able to kind of like peek through and reach through its reality every once in a while, so people can still get harmed and hurt, hence why the founders are still trying to protect the town. So in this particular story, we are following the descendants of these founders. They're all teenagers, so very angsty, teenagey type thing. I'm sad to say that this didn't end up lining up to be matched as a Stranger Things vibe. I was really hoping for a stronger Stranger Things feel because I love Stranger Things. I adore it. And this didn't end up hitting that mark for me, at least in my mind of what I was hoping for. The world building felt patchy and minimal. It was hard to follow. I just felt like none of it grabbed me. I didn't feel like any of the characters were that unique to each other. So sometimes it was hard to remember which character we were following at the time because it shifts perspectives. They all felt like kind of had the same voice. It just didn't feel, nothing stuck out to me. And I didn't end up caring about any of the characters or really caring about the plot. The characters were all angsty and lacked definition or depth. I only enjoyed the last 20% of this book that had some semblance of interest or plot that occurred. So overall, I ended up giving this 3 out of 5 stars, barely hit a 3. It was close to a 2. I just didn't really like this. I didn't like the characters. It was just too angsty for me. They didn't feel fleshed out. Like I said, most of the plot of this book didn't feel like much of a plot until probably close to the end. Once it got about 20% of the book left, that's when it picked up and it finally had some kind of a plot that I kind of cared about. But I know this is just a duology, so there's only one other book, but I'm just not interested in continuing. I just felt no desire to continue on. So I was disappointed with it. I have been wanting to read it for so long, but yeah, barely 3 out of 5 stars. The next one is the second book in a trilogy, and that is Court of Shadows by Madeleine Roux. The first book is House of Furies, which is a book I absolutely adored. If you haven't heard about it before, it follows this girl who ends up becoming a housemaid at this boarding house in the 1800s. I guess you could call it a boarding house. It's more like a vacation country home. A lot of rich people will come. There's supposed to be healing springs behind this house in the country. But the thing is that this house is a much sinister reason that exists. Not just to house people to come and get healing or to just stay and rest, but it's actually a place that compels evil people that have done terrible things in their lives to come and stay at this home. And none of those people come out alive. They end up hitting their comeuppance there and kind of like having to deal with their sins there. So it's like this creepy, spooky devil house. There are ghosts there. There are people that work there, have these creepy abilities. I freaking loved the first book. I was really excited to continue this. And boy, it disappointed me. The set did not feel like the first book at all. It started going in a completely different direction that I wasn't a huge fan of. I was so excited to continue this series, but it totally lacked the creepy paranormal vibe that I loved from the first book. It went for a more fantastical fae lore angle that I couldn't seem to get into. It kind of started to go from this sort of creepy, the devil and these devil's minions, and I don't know, it went from this paranormal, creepy, spooky vibe to almost going towards like a god and goddesses type vibe, which personally I'm not a huge fan. Like, I don't really find much interest in reading books about Greek mythology or things like that. Some people love that, and this focused a lot on like fae mythology mixed in with mythology of sort of like a different concept of heaven and hell, and I don't know. So I just didn't really like the fantasy drive it had in this book. It's so different from the first one to me. I was really hoping that it would vibe I'm really hoping, I can't even read my own notes. I'm really hoping the vibe of the first book returns in the last one. I have one more to go. I'm planning on reading it in November, and I'm really hoping it brings back the vibe from the first book. I have a feeling it won't, because there were a lot of just sort of overhanging things from this second one that I'm sure will probably be resolved in the third, and it's just not going to end up hitting what I want. I gave this 3 out of 5 as well. This was definitely middle of the road book. I was disappointed with it. I'm really hoping the third book picks it back up. I'm hoping there's more paranormal, creepy elements in the last book. All right, this next one that I read definitely made up for the terribleness of the past couple books that I read, and that was the second book in, I don't know if this is the last one or not, it just came out this year, but it was the second book that came after The Haunted by Danielle Vega, and that is The Unleashed by Danielle Vega. This is a much different type of cover than the first book. If you haven't heard me talk about The Haunted by Danielle Vega, the first book, we were following this girl and her family who have recently moved to this small town. Her parents have purchased this old home in the town that they're hoping to renovate and kind of make their dream home. Thing is that they don't know is that the house that they move into is kind of the notorious creepy house in the town. It's a town that other kids dare each other to go into. There have been murders and suicides happen in this home. It's just a creepy house, and everybody thinks it's haunted. And when they move in, this girl that we follow, when she starts going to school, she starts hearing all the things about her home and how creepy it is. And at first she doesn't believe it until some really scary stuff starts to go down in her house. So it is a classic haunted house type story. I absolutely loved the first book. It was one of the creepiest books I have ever read, and I loved it so much. And the second one did not disappoint. Still had the creepy, spooky, haunted vibes that I absolutely loved. It's a great sequel. It's just as terrifying as the first one. I love how all the horror and paranormal events are central to the story. It's continuous spooky from start to finish. There is non-stop spooky action in the first book and the second book, which I love. That is kind of the main driver of this story. It's not that there isn't any character development or plot when it comes to characters. There is, and I feel like the characters are well fleshed out and well done. However, the central focus of these books is the paranormal, is the ghostiness, is the spookiness. So there is constant, nonstop, spooky paranormal activity through this whole book. So it's not just like little spooky elements here and there. This is the whole thing. It's just terrifying, and I love that. It just makes you want to keep reading it. It's some of the best paranormal horror I've read. So I highly recommend these 2 books, The Haunted and The Unleashed by Danielle Vega. I don't know if there's going to be another one or not. I really hope so. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I absolutely adored it. Highly recommend. I know we're starting to go towards out of spooky season, but if you're still in a spooky season mood, definitely read these. They're so much fun. All right. Keeping with the haunted house vibe, I read Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. In this story, again, it's another haunted house thing. So we are following this woman whose father has recently passed away, and her father has left her a home that she lived in as a child. The thing about this home is that they actually only lived in this house for, I think, 20 days or something like this, until apparently they fled the home in fear for their lives. And their father actually wrote a book called The House of Horrors about their stay in this house, and ended up becoming a huge bestseller, became a huge deal and a huge thing. And the thing is she was young when she lived in this home. She was 5 years old. She doesn't really remember any of the experiences there. And to be honest, she thinks her dad is a fraud. She thinks her dad and mom are lying about the whole thing, and that this place isn't really haunted. So when her father passes away, and she doesn't even know her father still owns the home, he leaves the house to her, and she decides that she's actually going to fix up the house and see if she can just sell it, just get it out of her life. And she ends up going to the house to not only to renovate it, but she also wants to see if she can find clues to figure out whether or not her father has been lying all these years about the experiences that they had in apparently this haunted house, which sounds amazing to me because I love anything having to do with creepy haunted houses. I love how the chapters went back and forth between the present day story and chapters from the book House of Horrors. So we basically got to read the book House of Horrors. So it kind of goes back and forth between present day and the past of their experience in this house. The mystery aspect of what is real and truth really kept me intrigued. You know, the experiences that they apparently had in this home, did they really happen? And just kind of like trying to figure out the truth really made you want to keep reading. There's lots of very spooky moments and fantastic haunted house atmosphere in this book. It didn't end the way I expected it to, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. This was a lot of fun, a great thriller, spooky book. I really enjoyed it a lot, and I think it has a lot of great rereadability. There's so many thrillers, I think, that once you read them, you know, you're done. And this one, I feel like this is when you get to the end and you're like a little thrown off by the ending, to where I feel like you could go back and look for clues again to see what you missed. So this to me has a lot of rereadability to it. That's a hard word to say. So I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it a lot. This is my second Riley Sager book, and I'm definitely a fan. I really like Riley Sager's thrillers. They're fun. All right, let's go ahead and jump into what else? Another spooky book. This is one that I've had on my TBR for a long time, and that is Light as a Feather by Zoe Aarsen. This book, I actually realized it's been turned into a Hulu series, but I actually found out recently that I guess it was kind of republished. This was like a new cover and stuff, and this book is actually a little bit older and it's been out for a while. I didn't realize that. But in this story, we were following these teenage girls, this teenage girl friend group, and they have recently kind of like pulled a new girl into their fold who has recently moved to the town, and they end up having a sleepover together. And at the sleepover, this new girl suggests, why don't we play the game Light as a Feather, which I personally have never played, but I kind of know what it is. And basically what you do is that there is a girl who will kind of like predict what your death's going to be, try to give as much detail as they can, and then all the other participants will put their hands underneath the girl that's being told what her death will be while she lies flat on the ground. And they repeat, light as a feather, stiff as a board, and it makes the person that's lying down supposedly weightless or lighter, and they're able to lift her up off the ground with just a couple of fingers from each girl. And so they end up playing this game, kind of like do spooky thing at their slumber party, until things start happening. The girl that gave all the predictions, they start coming true. And then they start thinking, oh boy, I think there's something sinister about this girl that we've invited into our friend group, because now all the people that she's predicted to die are dying horrible deaths that she has described to the most minute detail, which sounds terrifying. It's got a little bit of like Final Destination vibes in a way. I've never seen the movies, but I kind of had the concept of what they are. So it's definitely like teenager, high schooly, but really creepy, and just like these creepy predictions. It definitely has like creepy witchy vibes. It's a very teenage, angsty-driven death curse book. The high schoolness of it all was a bit much sometimes. It's pretty high schooly angsty, to be honest, which is not my favorite thing. I was disappointed that the synopsis gave up way too much of the plot. So here's the thing, yeah. The synopsis I just gave you, if you actually read the synopsis, which even gives a little bit more detail than that, that's most of the book, and that's what kind of sucks. I don't normally read synopsis and they end up being most of the book. I kept expecting to learn more. Not that there weren't extra things that happened, but you had to get really far in the book. I mean, like past 50% through until you started to get to new content that wasn't listed in the synopsis, which I think is honestly ridiculous and frustrating because I just wanted more surprise and spooky. And I didn't feel as creeped out as I feel like I should have been because I saw things coming because it already told me about them. There's definite scary vibes, but it didn't quite hit the mark, probably because I ended up knowing way too much going into it because of the synopsis. So I ended up giving this 3 out of 5 stars. It was a bit of a disappointment for me. I was really excited to read this. I am actually going to read the next one. I think there's only I think there's 3 in this series, and I am interested in reading more. It did kind of end in a way that I was like, okay, I'm interested in learning more about this because I'm assuming once I get to the second book, especially if I don't really read the synopsis, which I'm not intending to, that it might be more surprising and more creepy for me because I just knew too much going into this one, unfortunately. Okay, let's see. How many do I have left? I've got one more left. I loved Grady Hendrix so much. I ended up loving the Southern Book Club's Guide, Slaying Vampires, a lot, to where I actually read another Riley Sager book that I've been super interested in, mainly because of the cover, and that is My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. If you can see, this book very much, it is set in the 80s, and it very much looks like a VHS tape cover of a horror movie from the 80s, which I think is so genius. It has such great vibes just from the look of it. It's another dip into the horror genre for me. I enjoyed the nostalgic aspect and references as well as visual ads for a more immersive experience, and I just realized I did not tell you what the book is about. I'm so sorry. It's very descriptive of what the name is. We're following these 2 teenage girls, and they are hanging out together. They're best friends. They're together all the time. They talk to each other every single day, and they're just tied at the hip. You know what I mean? They're just best friends. They do everything together. So these 2 girls and the rest of their friend group, they kind of all hang out during the summer, and they all go skinny dipping. And after this specific skinny dipping experience, this girl's best friend starts acting way different. And then starts acting so different that she ends up kind of thinking and figuring out that her friend has actually been possessed. And so this whole book is about that and trying to help her friend with her possession. Like I said, it's very nostalgic. Lots of references for the 80s and early 90s. There's a lot of ads or like pamphlet type things about different things from the 80s in the book, which is really cool. So it kind of gives it another immersive experience in there. There's definitely more horror aspects, with one section in particular that was extremely disgusting. I felt queasy the rest of the day. I don't want to give any spoilers for it, but there was this one chapter that was so gross and I couldn't look away. I kept reading, but I had so many physical, visceral reactions to this chapter. I was like, like I was just so grossed out. It was just creepy and weird and gross. And I was just like, why am I reading this? But I couldn't look away. It's one of those situations. So it was so gross, but I was like, but it makes me remember, right? It's every time I look at this book, I think about the visceral reactions I had to this story and the things that happened in it. And I mean, that's a good thing though. I mean, it makes me remember it. Let's see, I liked seeing the emphasis on friendships and fighting for those we love. The main protagonists we're following, her best friend who's been possessed, does everything she can to push her away. And she loves her friend and she knows her friend. She's like, I know this is not you. I know something's wrong and I'm going to help you even if you push me away, even if you do things to ruin my life. I love you and I want to save you. And I love that aspect of just like that strong friendship of like, I care about you. I love you. I'm going to save your life even if you don't want me to. And I loved that aspect of it. I'm not entirely sure if horror is really for me, since I like to lean towards more spooky than graphic horror, but it was still enjoyable. I don't really love gross out or gory. I like spooky, ghosty, haunted vibes. This definitely had a lot more gory vibes. For example, my husband tried to get me to watch The Exorcist. I made it 5 minutes in or less, and I was like, no, can't do it. It was just I can't do the gross out, really physical horror type stuff. I like spooky. I don't like just sort of gross out horror stuff and gory, and I can't. So this was a little bit difficult for me in some portions, but I do recommend it. I think I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I just realized I forgot to write down my rating in my book. I'm pretty sure I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I did really like it a lot. It was really a nostalgic feeling. It was really creepy. I loved the friendship elements, but it had some really rough stuff in it. And I mean, I try to remember trigger warnings. I know there was pet death. There's anorexia sort of trigger warnings. There's a lot of different trigger warnings in this, as I think are in a lot of horror novels. So I can't remember off the top of my head all the trigger warnings. So if you're interested and wanted to read this but wanted to know trigger warnings, you might want to look that up before you jump into it, because it's got a lot of stuff going on. But okay, that's a lot. I've been talking for 30 minutes. I'm so sorry. If you've made it this far, I really, really appreciate it. Those are all the books I read in October. Let me know down below if you have read any of these books and what you thought about them, or just let me know what was your favorite book that you read in October. I would love to know. On the side of the video over here is my logo. If you click on that, you can subscribe to my channel, follow me on my book journey. On this side of the video over here is a suggestion for another video if you want to watch another one right now. But thank you so much for watching. You rock. And don't forget to keep reading. Bye!